Pack your things, Jade. I'm not asking you as your husband right now, I'm telling you as your superior. You're fired, effective immediately. The words didn't just hurt, they felt like a physical weight pressing into my chest, stealing my breath. We were standing in the middle of the open plan office at Sterling Vance Marketing, the firm where we both worked. The firm I had helped Julian build from the ground up. My husband, Julian, was standing there with his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in that stubborn line I used to think was handsome, but now realized was just a sign of his immense ego. He looked down at me from the small raised platform where the managers made their morning announcements, his eyes cold and distant. Around us, 30 people, our colleagues, our friends, people we'd shared meals with, all went silent. The clicking of keyboards stopped. The hum of the coffee machine seemed to die down. Every single pair of eyes was on me. My name is Jade. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 12 years, I've given everything I have to two things: my marriage and this company. I'm the kind of person who believes in loyalty. I grew up in a small town in Indiana where your word was your bond, and you didn't just quit when things got tough. I brought that same energy to my marriage with Julian. We met in college, two ambitious kids with big dreams. I thought we were a team. I thought we were building a life together. But looking at the cold, hard stare in his eyes right now, I realized I'd been playing on a team of one. Julian was the manager of the creative department. He was the one they always praised in the board meetings. He was the favorite of the executive team, the guy who could do no wrong. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. What they didn't see was me sitting up until 4 in the morning, fixing his messy spreadsheets, rewriting his mediocre pitches, and smoothing over the feathers he ruffled with his arrogance. I didn't mind it at first. I loved him. I wanted him to succeed. I thought his success was our success. But lately, Julian had started believing his own hype. He'd started thinking he was the genius he pretended to be, and he'd started seeing me as a threat or worse, a nuisance. The first betrayal started small, like a slow leak in a roof. About 18 months ago, Julian began forgetting to include me in email chains. He started taking credit for my ideas in front of the board, using phrases like, "I came up with this," instead of "Jade and I developed this." At first, I made excuses for him. I told myself he was just stressed, or that he was just trying to secure our future. I was wrong. He was securing his own future, and he was doing it by erasing mine. Then came the second betrayal. A few months ago, a promotion for a directorship opened up. Everyone in the office knew I was the most qualified. My metrics were double the national average. I had the respect of the junior staff. But Julian, as my manager, had to submit the recommendation. He didn't just fail to recommend me, he actively blocked it. He told the owners that I was struggling with my work-life balance, and that he was concerned about my mental health. He used our private life as a weapon to keep me under his thumb. He wanted me stuck in a mid-level role where I could continue to do his work without ever getting the recognition I deserved. And now, here we were. The third betrayal, the public execution. I looked around the room. Our coworkers were looking down at their desks, or worse, looking at me with pity. That pity felt like acid in my veins. I saw Chloe, the 20-something junior designer Julian had been mentoring lately, smirking from behind her dual-monitor setup. She was the new favorite. Julian had been spending a lot of late nights with her, claiming they were working on special projects. I wasn't stupid. I saw the way he looked at her, and the way he'd stopped looking at me. "Julian, you can't be serious," I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay strong. "We're in the middle of the Peterson campaign. I've put months into that strategy. You know I'm the lead on that account." "And that's exactly why you're leaving," he said, his voice loud enough to echo off the high ceilings. He wanted this to be a show. He wanted to humiliate me so thoroughly that I'd never show my face in this industry again. The Peterson account is the biggest thing this firm has seen in a decade. It needs a leader who can actually deliver, not someone who's just coasting on their husband's success. "Your performance has been lagging, Jade. You're a distraction." Honestly, I should have done this months ago. A distraction. I had been the one who landed the Peterson lead in the first place. I had spent 6 months researching their market, finding the gaps their previous agency had missed. And now he was calling me a distraction. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. This was a man I had shared a bed with this morning. This was the man I had made coffee for at 6:30 a.m. And here he was, discarding me like a piece of trash in front of the entire professional world I had helped him build. I'm not leaving, I said, trying to find some scrap of dignity. You don't have the authority to fire me without HR being involved, Julian. There are protocols. You're violating every company policy in the book. Julian laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. I'm the department head, Jade. I've already spoken to the board. They trust my judgment. They know I'm doing what's best for the firm. Now, are you going to leave quietly, or do I have to call security? I couldn't believe it. He had gone behind my back to the board. He had probably spent weeks poisoning their minds against me, painting me as the lazy wife who was dragging him down. It was a calculated move. He wanted me out before the Peterson pitch next week, so he could take all the credit and move Chloe into my position. But Julian had made one fatal mistake. He had forgotten who I really was. He had forgotten that before I was his wife, and before I was a marketing coordinator at Sterling Vance, I was a fighter. And he had no idea about the secret I'd been keeping for the last 3 years. He didn't know about the laptop hidden in the back of my closet. He didn't know about the late nights I spent under the covers, not fixing his spreadsheets, but building something of my own. He didn't know that while he was busy playing office politics and flirting with junior designers, I had become one of the most sought-after anonymous consultants in the world. Online, I wasn't Jade, the struggling wife of a mid-level manager. Online, I was the maverick. I was the person top-tier CEOs called when their branding was failing. I was the one who had secretly salvaged the rebranding for 3 Fortune 500 companies in the last year alone. I had a bank account Julian didn't know about, a reputation he couldn't touch, and a network of allies he couldn't even dream of. And one of those allies was the man who actually owned Sterling Vance Marketing. I looked at Julian, really looked at him, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger. I saw a small, insecure man who was so terrified of my talent that he had to try and destroy me just to feel big. Fine, I said, my voice suddenly cold and steady. The shaking had stopped. The sadness was being replaced by something else, a slow-burning fire that was going to consume everything he'd built. If this is how you want to do it, Julian, then fine. I turned and walked to my desk. Every step felt like I was walking through wet cement, but I kept my head high. I grabbed my bag and a few personal items. I didn't take much. I didn't need much. As I walked toward the elevator, Julian called out one last thing, his voice dripping with malice. Don't bother coming home tonight, Jade. I've already had the locks changed. Your stuff is at your sister's place. I think it's time we both had a fresh start. The elevator doors closed on his smug, triumphant face. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, just breathing. The silence was deafening after the chaos of the office. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text from my sister, Sarah. Hey Jade, why is there a pile of suitcases on my porch? Are you okay? Please call me. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. You see, Julian thought he had won. He thought he had stripped me of everything, my job, my home, my reputation. He thought he was the one in control. But Julian was about to learn a very hard lesson about the price of betrayal. He was about to learn that you never, ever underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove to a small hotel on the edge of town. I didn't want to go to my sister's yet. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to activate the network I'd spent years building. As I checked into the room, the woman behind the desk looked at me with sympathy. I must have looked like a wreck. My eyes were red. My hair was a mess, and I was clutching a cardboard box of office supplies. Rough day, she asked softly. The worst, I said, but tomorrow's going to be better, much better. I went up to my room, ordered a pizza I didn't eat, and opened my laptop. I logged into my encrypted email. There was a message waiting for me. It was from Elias Vance. Elias was 78 years old, a legend in the advertising world, and the silent owner of the firm. He had retired from daily operations years ago, leaving the management to people like Julian's boss, but he still held the majority stake. He was also my mentor. 3 years ago, I had reached out to him as the Maverick to give him some unsolicited advice on a project his firm was bungling. He had been impressed. Over the years, we had developed a professional friendship. He didn't know the Maverick was the wife of one of his managers. He just knew I was the smartest mind he'd ever encountered in the business. The email read, Maverick, the Peterson pitch is next Thursday. I'm flying in for it. The internal team seems confident, but I have a bad feeling. The guy leading it, Julian, Seems more interested in his own image than the client's needs. Can you review the strategy and give me your honest thoughts? I'll pay your standard fee, of course. I stared at the screen. Julian had sent Elias the strategy I had written, the one he'd just fired me for. But I knew Julian. I knew he wouldn't just use my work. He would try to improve it. He would add his own flashy, substance-less ideas to it. He would ruin it. I typed back a short reply. I'll look into it, Elias. And I think it might be time we met in person. I'll be at the firm on Thursday. See you in the boardroom. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard. The fire in my chest was burning brighter now. The next few days were a blur of intense work and strategic planning. I stayed in that hotel room, barely sleeping, focused entirely on the Peterson account. I watched from afar as Julian posted on LinkedIn about his exciting new chapter and how he was leading the charge on the Peterson account. He even posted a photo of the office team at happy hour. Chloe was standing right next to him, her hand on his arm, both of them grinning at the camera. He looked happy. He looked relieved to be rid of me. Every time I felt like crying, I just looked at that photo. I reminded myself of the 3 escalating betrayals that had led us here. The first was the stolen credit. A year ago, I had come up with the Unity campaign for a major retail client. It was my brainchild. I worked on it through a flu, through my grandmother's funeral, through everything. When it won an industry award, Julian accepted it on stage. He didn't mention my name once. When I asked him about it later, he said, "Honey, we're a team. My name is on the door, so to speak. It looks better for the firm if the manager takes the lead. You know how it is." I believed him then. I was a fool. The second betrayal was the financial gaslighting. 6 months ago, I'd asked for a raise. I was doing the work of 3 people, and my salary hadn't budged in 3 years. Julian told me the firm was struggling. He told me he'd even taken a pay cut himself to keep the lights on. He asked me to sacrifice for our future. I found out later, through a stray pay stub, that he'd actually gotten a 30% bonus that same month. He used that money to buy a new sports car, the one he drove to work every day while I took the bus because we couldn't afford a second car. And the third. The third was the public firing. The absolute, calculated destruction of my career and my home in front of everyone we knew. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I was going to take back everything he'd stolen, and I was going to do it in the most public way possible. Wednesday night, the night before the pitch, I finally went to my sister's house. Sarah was waiting for me with a glass of wine and a look of pure fury. She'd spent the last few days moving my things into her spare room and listening to the office gossip. "I'm going to kill him, Jade, I mean it. I have a shovel in the garage and I know where the ground is soft," she said, her voice tight with anger. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in a week. "Not yet, Sarah. I need you to do something for me instead. I need you to be my witness." I spent the evening explaining my plan to her. I told her everything about the Maverick, about Elias Vance, and about the Peterson pitch. By the time I was done, Sarah was grinning. "You're a genius," she said, shaking her head. "He has no idea what's coming, does he?" "No," I said, looking at my reflection in the darkened window. "He thinks he's already won. And that's his biggest mistake." The next morning, I woke up early. I put on my best suit, a sharp, charcoal gray number that made me feel like I was wearing armor. I did my hair and makeup with precision. I looked professional, powerful, and completely unlike the distracted wife Julian had tried to portray. I drove to the office. I didn't go through the front door. I went through the service entrance, using the key card I'd forgotten to return. I knew the building's layout better than anyone. I made my way to the executive floor and waited in the small lounge area outside the main boardroom. I could hear Julian's voice through the heavy oak doors. He was practicing his opening remarks. He sounded confident. He sounded like a man who thought he had the world in the palm of his hand. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed. "Today, we're going to show you why Sterling Vance is the only choice for the Peterson brand. We've moved past the old, tired ways of thinking. We've brought in fresh blood, new perspectives." I checked my watch. 9:55 a.m. The meeting was set for 10 o'clock. A few moments later, I saw a tall, elderly man with a shock of white hair and a sharp tailored suit walking down the hallway. He moved with a grace and authority that only comes from decades of being the most powerful person in the room. It was Elias Vance. He stopped when he saw me. He didn't recognize me at first. To him, I was just an employee he'd seen in passing a few times. "Can I help you, young lady?" he asked, his voice gravelly and kind. I stood up and extended my hand. "Hello, Ilias, it's good to finally meet you in person." He froze. He looked at my hand, then at my face. His eyes narrowed as he processed the voice, the same voice he'd spoken to on encrypted calls for 3 years. "Maverick," he whispered, his eyes widening with shock. I smiled. "In the flesh, but today you can call me Jade, and I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say before you go into that room." Ilias looked at the boardroom doors, then back at me. He gestured to a private office nearby. "Sit, talk, you have 5 minutes." I didn't need 5 minutes, I needed 3. I showed him the original Peterson strategy on my tablet, the one I had written. Then I showed him the revised version Julian had sent him. I pointed out the flaws, the way Julian had stripped out the data-driven insights and replaced them with flashy graphics that meant nothing. I showed him how Julian had completely misinterpreted the client's core demographic. "He's going to lose them, Ilias," I said, my voice steady. "Peterson isn't looking for a show. They're looking for a partner who understands their legacy. Julian is giving them a circus." Ilias studied the screen, his face unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "And why did you wait until now to tell me this? Why didn't you come to me as Jade weeks ago?" "Because Julian is my husband," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I wanted to believe in him, I wanted to help him, but he fired me on Monday, in front of the whole office. He told everyone I was coasting on his success. He took the Peterson account as his own. Ilias' eyes flashed with a cold, hard anger. He hated disloyalty, he hated bullies, and most of all, he hated people who put their ego above the work. "He fired you?" Ilias asked, his voice low. "He did. In front of 40 people. "Well," Ilias said, standing up and smoothing his suit jacket, "it seems I've made a mistake in who I've been letting run my company. Come with me, Jade." "Ilias, wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Let him start. Let him get halfway through. I want everyone to see what he's really built." Ilias nodded slowly. A small, wicked smile touched his lips. "I like your style, Maverick. Wait outside. I'll send for you when the time is right." I watched him walk into the boardroom. The heavy oak doors closed with a solid thud. I waited. The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. I could hear muffled voices through the walls. I could imagine Julian pacing the floor, showing off his slides, basking in the attention of the Peterson executives. I could imagine Chloe sitting in the corner, taking notes and looking adoringly at her mentor. I thought about the last 12 years. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, the dreams I'd put on hold, the ways I'd shrunken myself so Julian could feel big. I thought about the nights I'd spent crying in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear me. It was all ending today. Suddenly, the boardroom door swung open. It was one of the junior assistants, looking pale and nervous. "Jade, Mr. Vance wants you in there, now." I took a deep breath. I smoothed my jacket. I stepped into the room. The scene was exactly what I expected. Julian was at the head of the table, his face flushed with what he thought was victory. The Peterson executives, 3 stern-faced men and 2 women, were sitting along the side, looking bored and skeptical. Ilias was at the far end, leaning back in his chair with his hands folded. When Julian saw me, his face went from smug to purple in a split second. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, stepping toward me as if to physically push me out. "I told you you're fired. Security, someone call security." Nobody moved. "Sit down, Julian," Ilias said quietly. Julian turned to him, confused. "Mr. Vance, you don't understand. This is my former assistant. She's unstable. She was just let go for performance issues. I'll have her removed immediately." "I said sit down," Ilias repeated, his voice dropping an octave. It was the kind of voice that stopped heartbeats. Julian sat. Ilias looked at the Peterson executives. "I apologize for the interruption, but before we continue with this presentation, I'd like to introduce you to the real mind behind the Peterson strategy. This is Jade. She is the lead consultant for this project, and as of 5 minutes ago, she is the interim director of operations for this firm." The room went dead silent. Julian's jaw literally dropped. "Director, Ilias, you can't be serious. She's a nobody, she's my wife, I'm the one who did the work." "Is that so?" Ilias asked, his voice calm but deadly. He looked at the Peterson CEO, a man named Mr. Peterson himself. "Mr. Peterson, you were just saying that the data on slide 14 seemed a bit thin. Julian, perhaps you could explain the methodology behind the market penetration forecast." Julian looked at the screen. Slide 14 was a mess of colorful pie charts that didn't actually say anything. He stammered. He looked at his notes. He looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at her shoes. Well, the methodology is based on current trends. We looked at the social media engagement and we extrapolated from the upward trajectory of the brand's previous quarters. It was word salad. It was embarrassing. Elias looked at me. Jade, I didn't even need to look at the screen. The methodology Julian is referring to doesn't exist. The real data, which was removed from this presentation, shows a 15% decline in your core demographics loyalty due to the shift in your manufacturing process 2 years ago. The strategy I designed focused on a return to roots campaign that addresses that lack of trust through transparent sourcing and a heritage-based narrative. If you look at the tablet I've just shared with your devices, you'll see the actual projected ROI based on a 3-phase rollout. The Peterson executives all looked down at their tablets. Within seconds, their bored expressions were gone. They started whispering to each other. They started nodding. Mr. Peterson looked up at me, his eyes sharp. This is exactly what we were looking for. Why wasn't this in the main deck? Because my husband thought it was too boring, I said, looking Julian dead in the eye. He wanted something with more flash. He thought you wouldn't notice the lack of substance if the colors were bright enough. Julian was shaking now. Jade, how dare you? You're sabotaging me. You're trying to ruin my career. You did that yourself, Julian, I said. The moment you decided that your ego was more important than the truth. The moment you decided that firing your partner was easier than acknowledging her talent. Elias stood up. I think we've seen enough. Julian, you're dismissed. Pack your things. And don't worry about the locks on your apartment. I believe Jade has already arranged for your belongings to be delivered to a local motel. Julian looked around the room, searching for an ally. He looked at the board members. They were all looking away. He looked at Chloe. She was already busy deleting files from her laptop, trying to distance herself from him as fast as possible. He was alone. He walked out of the room without a word. He didn't even look back. The rest of the meeting went perfectly. The Peterson Group signed a 3-year contract on the spot. They were thrilled. Elias was thrilled. When everyone had left, it was just me and Elias in the boardroom. You did good, Maverick, he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. Thank you, Elias, for everything. Don't thank me, you earned this. Now about that director position. I wasn't joking. This place needs a house cleaning. And I think you're just the person to do it. I looked out the window at the city skyline. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't look scary. It looked wide open. I went home to my sisters that night. We celebrated with pizza and bad reality TV. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Julian tried to sue for a portion of my earnings as the Maverick, but my legal team, a group of heavy hitters I'd met through my anonymous consulting, shut him down before he could even get a court date. He ended up working for a small, struggling firm in another state. Last I heard, he was still trying to convince people he was a genius. I kept my name, I kept my job, and I kept my secret, because being the Maverick is fun. But being Jade, being a woman who knows her worth and isn't afraid to stand up for it, that's the real success. The aftermath of the boardroom explosion wasn't just a quiet settling of dust. It was a total transformation of the ecosystem at Sterling Vance Marketing. For the first few days, the office felt like a ghost town that had suddenly been brought back to life. People walked on eggshells around me, not because they were afraid, but because they were in awe. They had seen the supportive wife transform into the director of operations in the span of 30 minutes. They had seen the man they once feared and admired, Julian, reduced to a shivering wreck. I spent my first 48 hours in the director's office, which used to be Julian's boss's office. I had a team of tech experts going through the company servers. What we found was even worse than I had imagined. Julian hadn't just been stealing credit, he'd been embezzling from the petty cash fund and the creative budget to pay for his networking dinners with Chloe and his weekend getaways. He had been creating fake invoices for vendors that didn't exist. He had been bleeding the firm dry while telling everyone that we were struggling. But the biggest discovery was the paper trail leading to Miller & Co., our biggest rival. Julian had been planning to jump ship for months. He had been secretly downloading our proprietary strategy templates and client databases. He was planning to burn Sterling Vance to the ground on his way out, using the Peterson account as his leverage to get a senior vice president role at Miller. He hadn't just tried to fire me, he had tried to erase the entire company. I sat at my desk on Friday evening, staring at the evidence on my screen. Elias Vance walked in, carrying 2 glasses of expensive scotch. He sat down across from me and sighed. He was a snake, Jade, Elias said, handing me a glass. A small, pathetic snake. I blame myself for not seeing it sooner. Don't, I said, taking a sip. He was good at what he did. He was a master of manipulation. He made everyone feel like they were part of something special, even while he was picking their pockets. So, what's the next move? Elias asked. We go after the money, I said. I've already contacted the forensic accountants. We're going to claw back every cent he stole, and then we're going to send the evidence to the district attorney. Elias nodded. And the Peterson account? It's safe. I've already assigned a new team. No more favorites. No more Chloe. We're doing this the right way. Chloe had been fired the same day as Julian. She tried to claim she was a victim, that Julian had pressured her, but the emails between them told a different story. She was a willing participant in the sabotage. She wanted the shortcut to the top, and she didn't care who she stepped on to get there. The next week was the hardest of my life. I had to face the reality of my marriage while running a multi-million-dollar firm. I had to meet with lawyers to start the divorce proceedings. I had to go to our house, the house I had decorated, the house where I thought we'd raise children, and pack my remaining things. Julian was staying at a cheap motel on the edge of town. He kept calling me, leaving desperate, sobbing voicemails. Jade, please, I was wrong, I was stressed. I didn't mean any of it. We can fix this. Just tell Elias to drop the charges. Please, Jade, I love you. I deleted every single one of them. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound sense of relief. The man I had loved for 12 years didn't exist. He was a character Julian had played to get what he wanted. Now that the play was over, I didn't need to stay in the theater. In the middle of all the chaos, the Maverick was busier than ever. My anonymous consulting firm had 3 new contracts from international brands. They didn't care about the drama at Sterling Vance. They only cared about the results I delivered. One of those clients was a tech startup in San Francisco. They wanted a complete brand overhaul. I spent my nights in the hotel room, working on their strategy. It was my escape. It was the one place where I was truly in control. One evening, I received a message on my private server. It was from a man named Arthur, a retired family lawyer who had once worked for my father. He'd heard about the situation through the grapevine and wanted to help. Jade, he wrote, I've been looking into your father's old estate. There's something you need to see, something your mother kept hidden to protect you. I met Arthur at a quiet diner the next morning. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. He handed me a dusty leather folder. Your father didn't just leave you the house and the small savings account, Arthur said. He had a secret investment portfolio. He'd been buying shares in a small, local tech company since the 90s. That company was eventually bought out by a major corporation. The shares were never claimed. I opened the folder. My breath caught in my throat. The value of the portfolio was staggering. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough to ensure I'd never have to work a day in my life if I didn't want to. Why didn't my mother tell me? I asked. She was afraid, Arthur said. She knew Julian. She saw what he was long before you did. She was afraid that if he knew about the money, he'd find a way to take it. She wanted you to have it when you were finally free of him. I sat there, staring at the numbers. My father had been looking out for me from the grave. He'd seen the man Julian was, even when I was blinded by love. I used a portion of the inheritance to hire the best legal team in the country. They weren't just divorce lawyers. They were sharks. They went through Julian's life with a fine-toothed comb. They found hidden bank accounts, secret properties, and even more evidence of his corporate espionage. By the time they were done, Julian had nowhere left to hide. The tension in the office began to shift from shock to a new kind of energy. With Julian and his prized children gone, the real talent at Sterling Vance began to shine. People who had been ignored for years were suddenly coming to me with brilliant ideas. We were collaborating. We were winning. I promoted a woman named Maria to head the creative department. She was 45, had 3 kids, and was the hardest worker I'd ever met. Julian had always passed her over because she wasn't the right image for the firm. In her first month, she landed 2 new accounts that were bigger than anything Julian had ever managed. I was learning that the favorites Julian had cultivated were just a mirror for his own insecurities. He wanted people around him who were either too young to challenge him or too mediocre to outshine him. Without that toxic hierarchy, the firm was thriving. But the biggest change was in me. I stopped being the woman who apologized for her own success. I stopped shrinking myself to make a man feel bigger. I started walking through the office with my head held high, not as Julian's wife, but as the woman who had saved the company. I remember one afternoon, standing on that same raised platform where Julian had tried to fire me. I looked out at the team. "I want to thank you all," I said. "The last few weeks have been a whirlwind, but we've come out stronger. We're not just a marketing firm anymore. We're a partnership, and from now on, your work will be seen. Your voice will be heard, and your success will be yours." The applause wasn't just polite, it was heartfelt. That night, I went back to the house to pick up the last of my things. The locks had been changed back, and I had the only key. The house felt empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. I found a small box in the back of the closet. Inside was a collection of notes Julian had written me when we were first dating. "You're the smartest person I know, Jade. I'm nothing without you. We're going to conquer the world together." I realized then that he had been telling the truth back then. He was nothing without me. He knew I was the talent. He knew I was the engine. And that was why he had tried so hard to destroy me. He was terrified that the world would find out he was just an empty suit. I threw the notes in the fireplace and watched them burn. As I walked out the front door for the last time, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Elias. "The Peterson Group just sent over the signed contract. 3 years full service. You did it, Jade. Or should I say Maverick?" I smiled. The first part of my life was over. The second part was just beginning. I drove back to the hotel, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had my family inheritance, I had my anonymous success, and I had the respect of the entire industry. Julian had tried to take my life, but all he'd done was give me a new one. And then, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I received an email from the district attorney's office. They had reviewed the evidence of Julian's embezzlement and corporate espionage. They were moving forward with criminal charges. Julian was arrested the following morning at his motel. I didn't go to the courthouse. I didn't need to see him in handcuffs. I already knew I'd won. The resolution was finally in sight. But first, I had one more thing to do. I called a meeting of the board of directors. I had a proposal for them. I wanted to buy Julian's remaining shares of the company. I wanted to be the majority owner, alongside Elias. The board agreed without hesitation. They knew that I was the reason the firm was still standing. I was 36 years old. I was a divorcee, I was a survivor, and now I was the owner. Julian tried to reach out one last time from jail. He sent a letter, handwritten on yellow legal pad. "Jade, please, think about everything we've been through. Think about the dreams we had. Don't do this to me." I didn't read past the first paragraph. I folded the letter and put it in the shredder. I had new dreams now, dreams that didn't involve him, dreams that were mine alone. As the sun set over the city, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. The future was wide open. I was the Maverick. I was the owner of Sterling Vance, and I was Jade. I was finally, truly free. The final transformation of Sterling Vance into Jade Vance Marketing wasn't just a change of name on the door. It was a total rebirth of our collective spirit. 6 months had passed since Julian was led out of the office in handcuffs. The criminal trial had been swift. With the mountain of evidence I'd gathered as the Maverick and the forensic accounting reports, there was no defense he could offer. He pleaded guilty to embezzlement and corporate espionage. He was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security facility, and he was ordered to pay back every cent he'd stolen. The day the sentence was handed down, I sat in my office and looked out at the city. I didn't feel the surge of triumph I'd expected. I just felt a quiet, peaceful closure. The man who had tried to destroy me was finally facing the consequences of his own actions. The firm was thriving. Without the toxic atmosphere Julian had created, our creativity had exploded. We were no longer just a local powerhouse, we were a national leader. We had opened a second office in New York, and our client list included some of the biggest names in tech and fashion. But the most important change was the culture. I implemented a strict no stolen credit policy. Every project was tracked, and every contribution was documented. We had a weekly recognition meeting, where the junior staff were given the chance to present their work directly to the clients. There were no more prized children. There were only talented professionals who were respected for their contributions. Elias Vance remained my partner and my closest advisor. He had moved back into the office part-time, mostly just to enjoy the energy of the new team. "You've done it, Jade," he told me one morning, as we watched a group of designers collaborating in the lounge. You've built the company I always dreamed of, a place where the work actually matters more than the ego. We built it, Elias, I said. I couldn't have done it without you. Nonsense, he laughed. You were the maverick long before you were my partner. I just gave you the keys to the building. The maverick was still active, though I had slowed down my anonymous consulting to focus on the firm. I had used a portion of my father's inheritance to start a foundation that provided scholarships for women entering the marketing and tech industries. I wanted to make sure that no other young woman had to endure what I went through. One evening, I received a package in the mail. It was a box of old photos from my mother. She'd found them while cleaning out her attic. There was a photo of me at 22, standing on the stage at my college graduation. I looked so young, so full of hope. I was standing next to Julian. He had his arm around me, looking like the supportive boyfriend. I looked at my eyes in that photo. I saw the spark of ambition, the intelligence that I'd eventually learn to hide to keep him happy. I wished I could go back and tell that girl that she didn't need to shrink herself. I wished I could tell her that she was enough, all on her own. But then I realized that I wouldn't be the woman I am today without that journey. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, it had all been the forge that shaped me. I was 37 now. My divorce was final. I had bought a beautiful brownstone in the city, and I was finally living a life that was authentic. I remember the first time I went out on a date after the divorce. He was a kind man, a professor at the local university. He didn't know anything about the marketing world. He just liked my laugh and the way I talked about my work. You're very passionate about what you do, he told me over dinner. I am, I said. It took me a long time to find my voice. I'm not going to lose it again. He smiled and reached across the table to hold my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a revolution. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I was worthy. I already knew. Julian was released on parole about 18 months later. He tried to contact me, of course. He sent a long, rambling email about how he'd found God in prison and how he wanted to make amends. I didn't reply. Some betrayals are too deep for amends. I didn't hate him anymore, but I didn't owe him my time or my forgiveness. He was a part of my past, like a bad dream that you eventually forget once the sun comes up. I heard later that he moved back to his hometown and was working as a car salesman. It seemed fitting. He was always good at selling things that didn't have much substance. The Peterson Group remained our biggest client. Mr. Peterson himself became a close friend and a mentor. He often laughed about that first meeting in the boardroom. I knew the moment you walked in that you were the one in charge, he told me during our annual contract renewal. Julian was just noise, you were the signal. I'll take that as a compliment, I said. It's the truth, Jade. You're one of the best in the business. As I look back on everything that happened, I realized that the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't exposing Julian or taking over the company. It was the moment I chose to believe in myself. It was the moment I decided that I wasn't going to be a victim of someone else's insecurity. To anyone out there who is currently feeling like they're being silenced, like their hard work is being stolen, or like they're being told they're not enough, please listen to me. You are the engine. The people who try to make you feel small are only doing it because they're terrified of your power. They know that without you, they have nothing. Don't wait for an owner to enter the room. Don't wait for a mentor to save you. Be your own maverick. Build your own secret strength. Keep your own files. And when the time is right, don't be afraid to stand up and speak the truth. The world needs your voice. The world needs your talent. And most importantly, you need yourself. My name is Jade. I'm 37 years old. I'm the owner of a successful marketing firm, a philanthropist, and a survivor of the ultimate betrayal. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly who I was meant to be. The day we officially changed the name on the glass doors from Sterling Vance to Jade Vance was one of the most emotional days of my life. I stood in the lobby as the workmen carefully scraped away the old letters. Elias stood next to me, his hands in his pockets, a look of pure satisfaction on his face. "It looks right, doesn't it?" he asked. "It does," I whispered. We had a small party for the staff that evening. No fancy galas, no expensive scotch, just a lot of pizza, some good music, and a lot of laughter. I looked around the room and saw the people who had stood by me during the darkest days. I saw Sarah, who had let me stay in her spare room. I saw Maria, who was now leading the creative team to heights Julian could never have imagined. I even saw Toby. He'd stayed with the firm, working his way back up from the bottom. He'd apologized to me 100 times for his role in Julian's schemes. I'd forgiven him, but I'd also made sure he knew that his loyalty had to be to the work and the truth, not to a person's ego. I learned more in the last 6 months than I did in 3 years with Julian, Toby told me as he grabbed a slice of pizza. Good, I said. That's the goal. As the party wound down, I went back to my office. I sat in my chair and looked at the photo of me and Julian at graduation. I'd kept it, not because I missed him, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. I thought about the night I'd sat in that hotel room, feeling like my world had ended. I thought about the fear, the shame, the absolute certainty that I was a failure. It was all a lie. I was never a failure. I was just in the wrong room. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the Maverick server. I had a new message from a woman in London. She was a marketing assistant at a large firm, and her boss was taking credit for her work. She was scared, she was tired, and she didn't know what to do. I started typing. Hello. My name is Jade. I know exactly how you feel, but I want you to know something. You are the engine, and it's time you started acting like it. I spent the next 2 hours talking her through her options, helping her build her own hidden strength. It was the most fulfilling work I'd done all year. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about my own success. It was about helping other women find their way out of the same trap I'd been in. The firm continued to grow, but I made sure to stay grounded. I still made my own coffee in the morning. I still took the time to talk to the interns. I still worked late when a project needed that extra bit of soul. I remember a meeting we had with a new client, a massive retail chain that was looking for a fresh perspective. They were being pitched by 3 other firms, all led by men in expensive suits. When it was our turn, I walked into the room with Maria and a junior designer named Lily. We didn't have any flashy graphics or empty promises. We just had the data, the strategy, and the truth. We're not here to give you a show, I told the CEO. We're here to give you results, and we're here to build a brand that actually means something to your customers. We won the account on the spot. The CEO told me later that he'd never seen a team work so seamlessly together. You can tell you all respect each other, he said. That's rare in this business. It shouldn't be, I said. As I walked out of that meeting, I felt a deep sense of pride. I hadn't just built a company, I'd built a community. I eventually moved out of the brownstone and into a house with a big garden. I started growing my own vegetables. It was a slow, quiet hobby that taught me a lot about patience and resilience. You can't rush a garden. You have to nurture it, protect it, and trust that the seeds you've planted will eventually grow. My mother came to visit me often. We spent long afternoons sitting on the porch, talking about my father and the secret portfolio he'd left me. He always knew you were special, Jade, she told me one evening as the sun went down. He just wanted to make sure you were safe. I am, Mom, I said, leaning my head on her shoulder. I'm safe, and I'm happy. The final word on Julian came about 5 years after the trial. I heard from a mutual friend that he'd passed away from a sudden heart attack. He was only 45. I didn't feel anything when I heard the news. No sadness, no relief, no anger. He had been dead to me for a long time. I sent a small bouquet of flowers to his mother, a kind woman who had always been good to me. It was the last thing I ever did that had anything to do with him. My life continued to flourish. Jade Vance became a global brand, but I remained the same woman who grew up in that small town in Indiana. I remained the woman who believed in loyalty, hard work, and the power of the truth. I am 37 years old. I am Jade, I am the Maverick. And I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Thank you for being part of my story. If you've enjoyed this journey, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's build a world where every engine is recognized and every voice is heard. Until next time, keep fighting, keep building, and never ever let anyone take your power.